You ever laugh at something you don't understand and realize too late it wasn't meant for you? The laughter came easy, sharp and careless, echoing across the sun-baked concrete of the Naval Special Warfare Training Compound as a cluster of recruits gathered near the edge of the staging area. Their uniforms still stiff with newness, their confidence louder than the distant thump of helicopter rotors cutting through the humid afternoon air, and at the center of it stood an old man who didn't belong, not by their standards, not by their rules, dressed in a faded denim jacket that had seen more years than any of them had lived. His posture relaxed but unmoving, like a weathered post driven deep into the ground long before the base had even been built, his pale blue eyes scanning nothing and everything at once, as if the noise around him simply didn't register the way it should. "Hey, old-timer," one of the recruits called out, his voice laced with that easy arrogance that comes from never having been tested. "You lost or just sightseeing?" A few chuckles followed, low at first, then building as others turned to look, drawn in by the presence of something out of place, something easy to dismiss. And then someone noticed it, just a glimpse at first beneath the cuff of the old man's sleeve as the wind shifted and lifted the fabric slightly, a dark shape against pale, weathered skin. "Yo, what's that?" Another recruit stepped closer, squinting, then grinning as he reached out without permission, fingers hooking the edge of the sleeve, and tugging it down just enough to reveal the ink beneath. And just like that, the laughter sharpened, grew louder, feeding on itself. "No way," the first recruit said, shaking his head. "You got that thing at a gas station, or what?" The tattoo was old, older than any design they recognized, the lines thick and slightly blurred with time. A serpent coiled into a perfect circle biting its own tail, and at the center, a single five-pointed star, simple, almost crude, nothing like the clean, modern insignias they had trained to memorize. Nothing official, nothing impressive to their untrained eyes. "Looks like something out of a cereal box," someone muttered. And that did it. The group broke into open laughter now, shoulders bumping, heads shaking, their voices overlapping in a chorus of mockery. That filled the space between them and the man who hadn't moved an inch. Not a flinch, not a shift in posture, nothing. He simply stood there, the sleeve now pulled back, the tattoo fully exposed to the harsh afternoon light. And for a brief moment, something almost imperceptible passed through his eyes. Not anger, not embarrassment, something deeper, something older, like a distant memory brushing against the surface before sinking back down into stillness. "What's it mean, huh?" The recruit pressed, leaning in closer, his grin wide, expecting a reaction, any reaction, but the old man said nothing, his gaze drifting past them toward the runway where heat shimmered in waves above the asphalt. The faint scent of fuel carried on the wind, the rhythmic pulse of rotor blades somewhere beyond the hangars, sounds that seemed to anchor him to a place none of them could see, and that silence, that complete lack of response, only made the recruits louder, bolder, mistaking restraint for weakness, mistaking stillness for emptiness. And somewhere at the edge of the scene, unnoticed by most, a petty officer paused mid-step, his eyes narrowing slightly as they landed on the tattoo, the laughter continuing behind him, unaware that something had just shifted, something subtle but irreversible, like the first crack in glass before it finally gives way. The petty officer did not laugh, he did not join the noise or step forward like the others. Instead, he stood still at the edge of the group, his boots planted firmly on the hot concrete as the sound of careless voices washed over him, and his eyes stayed locked on the old man's arm, on that tattoo, the shape of it settling into his mind with a strange and immediate weight that he could not explain, because it was not just the design, not just the faded ink or the way it had aged into the skin. It was the way the man carried it, like it was not decoration but memory, like it belonged to something that had never been meant to be seen by outsiders. And that was what felt wrong, deeply wrong. "Come on, say something." Logan Pierce pushed again, stepping even closer now, his shadow falling across the old man's boots. "You got a story, or is it just for show?" The group laughed again, louder this time, feeding off the silence, but the old man remained exactly as he was, shoulders relaxed, hands at his sides, his gaze drifting slightly as if the question had already passed through him without leaving a mark. And for a brief second, the wind shifted across the compound, carrying with it the low hum of distant engines and the metallic rattle of equipment being moved somewhere beyond the hangars. And in that moment, his eyes changed, just slightly. Not enough for the recruits to notice, but enough for someone who knew what to look for, enough for the petty officer to feel it like a pressure in his chest. Because that was not the look of confusion or age. It was recognition, the kind that came from a place far removed from this clean, controlled training ground. It means nothing, right? Another recruit added, circling slightly, trying to keep the attention on himself. Just some old ink from a long time ago. But the words sounded hollow even as they left his mouth, because something about the atmosphere had shifted, something subtle but undeniable, and the petty officer felt it fully now, a quiet alarm building behind his ribs, his training telling him to trust that instinct even when there was no clear reason to. Because he had seen something like this before, not the tattoo itself, but the reaction it triggered in him. That quiet sense that the situation in front of him was not what it appeared to be, that they were standing too close to something they did not understand, and the recruits were. Still laughing, still pushing, still leaning into the moment as if it was theirs to control, while the old man simply let it pass over him like wind over stone, unmoved, unchanged, and that contrast, that complete imbalance between noise and silence, was what finally made the petty officer act, not with confrontation, not with raised voice or visible authority, but with something far more deliberate. He stepped back slowly, turning away from the group as if he had lost interest, his movements calm, measured, giving nothing away, but his mind was already racing, pulling at threads he could not fully see yet, fragments of briefings, of stories half told, of names that were never written down but always spoken carefully. And as he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, shielding it slightly from view, the laughter behind him continued, unaware that the moment had already begun to change, unaware that the first call in a chain they could not stop was about to be made. And somewhere behind them, the old man's gaze followed none of it, because he had seen this pattern before, many times, and he knew exactly how it ended, even if they did not. The call connected on the second ring, a crisp voice answering without hesitation. Operations. And the petty officer turned slightly away from the open concrete, lowering his tone just enough to keep it contained. This is Petty Officer Daniel Brooks. Training Compound Delta. I need you to check a symbol. Now. There was a pause on the other end, not confusion but calculation, the kind that measured urgency without asking unnecessary questions. Go ahead. Brooks exhaled slowly, his eyes drifting back toward the group where the laughter had not yet died, where Logan Pierce was still circling the old man like this was a game he intended to win. Serpent, full circle, biting its own tail, 5-point star centered, no lettering, no unit designation. Another pause, longer this time, and Brooks felt it immediately, that shift in silence that meant something had landed exactly where it needed to. Stand by. The line did not disconnect, it did not go dead, it simply went quiet, and that quiet carried weight. The kind that made Brooks straighten slightly without realizing it, because somewhere on the other end, something was being pulled, something classified, something not meant for open channels, and back on the concrete. The recruits were still pressing forward, unaware that the tone of the moment had already begun to change. You cannot even explain it, can you? Logan said with a smirk, folding his arms now, confident in the control he believed he had. Just another story that does not exist. And still, the old man said nothing, his gaze steady, distant, like he was listening to something far beyond the voices in front of him, something older than their questions, older than their assumptions, and that silence began to stretch, just slightly longer than before, just enough to make one or two of the recruits shift their weight without knowing why, just enough for the laughter to lose a fraction of its edge. And Brooks felt it too, the moment tightening, the air itself seeming to settle heavier against his skin as the voice returned on the line. Lower now, controlled. Repeat your location. Brooks answered immediately. Delta Compound, Training Yard 3. There was no hesitation this time. Do not engage. Do not escalate. Remain in position. Brooks swallowed once, his grip tightening slightly around the phone. Sir, what am I looking at? Another pause, but this one was different. Not uncertainty, not delay, something closer to restraint. You are looking at something you do not understand. The words were measured, deliberate, Stay exactly where you are. And then the line ended. Clean. Final. No explanation. No follow-up. Just silence. And Brooks lowered the phone slowly, his eyes lifting back to the scene in front of him, where nothing had visibly changed, and yet everything felt different, because now he knew, not what it was, but that it was something. Something that reached beyond training, beyond rank, beyond the simple hierarchy that recruits believed in. And as Logan took another step forward, opening his mouth to push further, to squeeze one more reaction out of a man who had given him nothing, Brooks felt a quiet certainty settle into place. This was no longer a situation that belonged to them, and somewhere beyond the compound, beyond the visible edges of their world, something had already started moving toward them, fast. Logan Pierce took that final step closer, close enough now that the shadow of his frame fully covered the old man's boots, his grin sharper, his voice louder, as if volume alone could force a reaction that silence had denied him. "You hear me, or what?" he said, tilting his head slightly. "Because right now it just looks like you walked onto the wrong base with the wrong story." A few of the recruits chuckled again, but it was thinner now, less certain, the kind of laughter that needed reinforcement to survive, and Logan felt it slipping, felt the moment not landing the way he expected, so he reached out again, fingers brushing dangerously close to the tattoo as if to provoke something, anything. And that was when the old man moved, not fast, not aggressive, just a simple shift of his arm, a small deliberate motion that placed the tattoo just out of reach, and for the first time, his eyes came fully into focus, locking onto Logan with a calm that did not challenge, but did not yield either. "Careful," he said quietly, his voice low, steady, carrying more weight than its volume suggested. And that single word landed differently than anything else that had been said so far. Not loud, not sharp, but precise, like it had been chosen long before this moment ever happened. Logan hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, something instinctive pulling at him before his pride pushed it aside. "Careful of what?" he shot back, forcing a laugh that did not quite reach his eyes. "It is just ink." The old man held his gaze for another second, then let it go, his attention drifting again toward the distant runway where the heat shimmered distorted the horizon. And that was when it happened. Not here, not visible to the recruits, but somewhere far beyond the compound, inside a quiet operations office where screens glowed softly in the dim light. A file had just been opened, not by name, not by rank, but by pattern, by symbol, and the moment it appeared on the monitor, the room changed. The casual posture of the duty officer straightened, the air tightening with recognition. "Sir," a voice called out across the room, controlled but urgent. "We have a match." Another figure stepped closer, older, sharper, his eyes narrowing as the image resolved fully on the screen. The same serpent, the same star, aged but unmistakable, and for a brief moment, no one spoke. Because some things did not require explanation, some things carried their own. "Wait." The moment they were seen, "Location?" the man asked, his voice even, but there was something underneath it now, something that had not been there seconds ago. "Training Compound Delta," came the reply, and that was all it took. The man reached for the secure line without hesitation, dialing a number that was not listed on any standard chain of command, the kind of number that existed outside routine, outside protocol. And when it connected, he did not introduce himself, he did not explain, he simply said, "Sir, you need to hear this." And on the other end of that line, in a different building entirely, Commander Ethan Cross paused mid-step, his expression tightening as the first words reached him, and back on the training yard, the recruits still stood in a loose circle around a man they did not understand, the laughter fading into something uncertain, something quieter, while the old veteran remained exactly where he was, unmoved, as if he could already feel the shift coming long before any of them realized it. Commander Ethan Cross did not ask for clarification. He did not request a second confirmation or a longer explanation, because the moment the description reached him, something old and buried shifted into place with a clarity that erased any doubt, and for a brief second, he stood completely still in the narrow corridor outside his office. The low hum of ventilation systems and distant activity fading into the background as the image formed in his mind with absolute precision. Serpent, closed. Circle, star at the center, no designation, no registry, nothing official and yet more real than anything that ever had been. "Where is he?" Cross asked, his voice lower now, controlled in a way that only came when something mattered, truly mattered. "Training Compound Delta, sir." The reply came immediately, and that was enough. Cross ended the call without another word and turned sharply, his stride changing. No longer casual, no longer routine, but direct, purposeful, cutting through the hallway with a momentum that caused two junior officers to step aside instinctively without knowing why, because there was something in his posture that signaled urgency without noise, authority without announcement, and inside his mind, the past was not a story. It was not something distant or faded. It was immediate, clear, like it had never left, a memory not triggered by nostalgia, but by recognition. Because that symbol was not supposed to exist anymore, not in any visible form, not on any living person walking freely across a training yard. And yet it had. And that meant only one thing. Somewhere across the compound, a man was standing who had no place in any database, no file that could be pulled, no record that could be explained, and Cross felt it fully now. The weight of that realization settling into his chest as he pushed through the exit doors into the harsh afternoon light, the heat hitting him instantly, the distant sound of rotor blades growing louder as he moved. Faster, his boots striking the concrete with sharp, measured steps that carried him straight toward the staging area, and back at Delta Compound. The recruits had grown quieter without realizing it, the laughter now reduced to scattered comments that lacked conviction, because something in the air had shifted in a way none of them could define. Logan Pierce crossed his arms again, trying to hold on to the control he thought he still had. But even he felt it now, that subtle tension pressing in from all sides, that sense that the moment had moved beyond him without his permission. "You think that changes anything?" he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. But the old man did not respond, did not even acknowledge the words. His gaze still fixed somewhere beyond the visible horizon, as if he was listening for something far away, something approaching, and in the distance, just beyond the rows of low buildings and parked vehicles, a figure moved with speed and purpose, cutting across the compound in a straight line, and though the recruits could not yet see him clearly, the shift had already begun, because some moments did not announce themselves with noise. They arrived quietly, with weight, and by the time anyone realized what was happening, it was already too late to take it back. The first thing they noticed was not the man. It was the change in movement around them, subtle at first, a shift in posture from the personnel along the edge of the compound. Conversations cutting short mid-sentence, heads turning in the same direction without anyone calling attention to it. And then the sound, not loud, not dramatic, just the steady, unmistakable rhythm of boots striking concrete with purpose, measured and fast, closing distance with every step, and one by one, the recruits began to register it. Their attention pulled away from the old man as their focus drifted toward the approaching figure. Logan Pierce turned last, slower than the others, his expression still holding on to that last trace of confidence, as if he could outwait whatever was coming. But even he felt at the moment he saw the man moving toward them. The way space seemed to open in front of him without effort, the way no one stepped in his path, the way the air itself seemed to tighten around his presence. And though Logan did not yet recognize him by name, his body reacted before his mind did. A small unconscious shift in stance, shoulders pulling back, jaw tightening slightly, as Commander Ethan Cross closed the final distance without slowing, his eyes already locked onto a single point beyond the recruits, beyond the circle, beyond the noise that had filled the space just moments before. And that was when the silence began, not all at once, not like a switch being flipped, but like a ripple moving outward, voices fading, laughter dying mid-breath, until the only sound left was the distant hum of the bass and the faint whisper of wind sliding across the open concrete. Cross did not acknowledge the recruits. He did not ask questions, did not demand explanations. He simply stepped through them, and they moved without being told, instinctively parting as if something in them understood that this moment did not belong to them anymore. And as he passed Logan Pierce, there was a brief instant where their eyes met, just a fraction of a second, but it was enough for Logan to feel something drop in his chest, something cold and immediate, because there was no anger there, no visible judgment, only focus, absolute and unshakable. And then, Cross was standing directly in front of the old man, close enough now that the details became clear: the faded denim, the weathered hands, the tattoo still exposed beneath the sleeve. And for the first time since he had arrived, Cross slowed, just slightly, his gaze dropping to the symbol, as if confirming something he already knew. And in that moment, time seemed to stretch, the recruits watching, unmoving, unsure, caught between curiosity and a growing sense that they had crossed into something they did not understand. And Brooks stood at the edge, his breath steady but controlled, watching the final piece fall into place, because this was the moment everything hinged on, the point where assumption would collapse into reality. And Cross remained still for 1 second longer, just enough for the weight of recognition to settle fully into the space between them, before his posture changed, not dramatically, not with force, but with precision, shoulders squared, chin lifted slightly, a movement so deliberate and exact that it carried more authority than any shouted command ever could. And though no words had been spoken yet, everyone there felt it. Something had just shifted beyond reversal, something that would not be undone. Commander Ethan Cross did not rush the moment. He did not fill the silence with words or explanation, because what stood in front of him did not require either. His eyes fixed on the faded lines of the tattoo, tracing the circle, the serpent, the star at its center, and for a fraction of a second, something almost imperceptible passed through his expression, not surprise, not disbelief, but recognition layered with something deeper, something that carried weight far beyond rank or protocol. And then he moved, a single precise motion, his heels aligning, shoulders locking into place, and without a word, without hesitation, he raised his hand in a sharp, deliberate salute, the kind that was not performed, not taught, but earned through understanding, through history, through something the recruits around him could not yet grasp. And the effect was immediate, absolute. The air itself seemed to freeze as every set of eyes locked onto that gesture. Because this was not routine, this was not a casual acknowledgement. This was something else entirely, something that carried meaning none of them had been trained to interpret. Logan Pierce felt it first in his chest, a sudden tightening that stole the confidence from his posture, his arms dropping slightly from where they had been crossed, his mouth parting as if to speak, but finding nothing to hold on to, because nothing in his experience explained what he was seeing. A commander of that level standing in front of a man he had just mocked, offering him a salute that was absolute, unwavering, and completely unreturned, because the old man did not mirror the gesture. He did not snap to attention or acknowledge it in any formal way. He simply stood there, looking at Cross with the same calm, steady gaze he had held from the beginning, as if the moment unfolding in front of him was not unexpected, not surprising, but inevitable. And that contrast, that imbalance between the weight of the salute and the simplicity of his response, made it even heavier, even harder to process for those watching. Brooks felt it settle fully now, the confirmation of everything his instincts had been trying to tell him, his spine straightening unconsciously as he stood at the edge of the scene, no longer uncertain, no longer questioning, just witnessing, while around him, the recruits remained frozen in place, their earlier laughter now something distant and foreign, something they could not quite connect to themselves anymore, because the reality in front of them had shifted too far, too fast. And Cross held the salute for 1 second longer than necessary, just long enough to make it clear that this was not symbolic, not procedural, but personal. And when he finally lowered his hand, the silence that followed was deeper than anything that had come before, a silence that demanded attention, that forced understanding even where none existed. And only then did Cross speak, his voice low, controlled, carrying across the open space without needing volume. "Sir," he said, a single word, simple, direct, but filled with a respect that no one there had expected. And in that moment, the entire structure the recruits believed in, the hierarchy they trusted, the assumptions they had built their confidence on, shifted beneath their feet, because respect at that level was never given lightly, never offered without reason. And whatever that reason was, it stood quietly in front of them, wearing a faded jacket, carrying a symbol none of them had understood, until now. The word hung in the air long after it was spoken, simple and restrained, yet carrying a weight that pressed down on every person standing there. And for a moment no one moved, no one spoke, because there was nothing left to say that would not break whatever had just been revealed. The old man studied Commander Cross for a second longer, his expression unchanged, but there was a subtle shift in his eyes, something quieter, something almost acknowledging, not the rank, not the uniform, but the understanding behind the gesture. And then he gave the smallest nod, barely perceptible, the kind of motion that would have gone unnoticed by anyone not watching closely, but Cross saw it. And that was enough, more than enough, because respect at that level did not require ceremony. It did not need explanation. It existed in moments like this, unspoken and absolute. Behind them, the recruits stood frozen in place, their earlier confidence gone, replaced by a growing realization that they had stepped into something far beyond their understanding. Logan Pierce felt it fully now, the weight of his own words echoing back at him with a clarity that made his chest tighten, his eyes flicking between the tattoo and the commander as if trying to reconcile the two, trying to force them into something that made sense. But nothing did, nothing fit, because the system he believed in did not account for this. Did not explain why a man with no visible rank, no uniform, no credentials would command that level of respect from someone like Cross. And the silence stretched again, deeper this time, until Cross finally spoke once more, his voice still low, still controlled, but carrying something new now, something that reached beyond the immediate moment. "We thought you were gone," he said, and there was no accusation in it, no demand, just a statement that carried years behind it. The old man exhaled. Slowly, the faintest hint of something passing across his face, not regret, not pride, just time. "Most did," he replied, his voice steady, unhurried, as if the words had been waiting a long time to be spoken but never needed to be. Cross held his gaze, and for a second, the world around them seemed to fall away. The recruits, the compound, the noise of training and machinery, all of it fading into the background as 2 points in time aligned across decades without needing explanation. Brooks watched from the edge, his understanding deepening with every second, because this was not just recognition. This was history, the kind that did not get written down, the kind that lived in memory and silence. And as the moment settled, Cross shifted slightly, turning just enough for his voice to carry past the old man and toward the recruits without raising it. "You will remember this," he said, not as a threat, not as a reprimand, but as something final, something that did not need repetition. And no one responded, no one dared. Because they already knew, this was not a lesson they would forget, not after this, not after seeing what respect actually looked like when it was earned. And the old man, Arthur Hayes, let his sleeve fall back into place, the tattoo disappearing beneath the worn fabric as if it had never been meant to remain visible, as if its purpose had already been fulfilled. And without another word, he turned slightly, his movements calm, unhurried, stepping away from the center of attention with the same quiet presence he had arrived with, leaving behind a silence that no one seemed willing to break. No one stopped him as he walked, not because they were ordered to stand down, not because anyone gave a command, but because something in the moment made it clear that stopping him was never an option to begin with. Arthur Hayes moved across the concrete with the same quiet, steady pace he had carried from the start, his boots making soft contact against the ground, each step unhurried, unbothered, as if the weight of what had just happened did not follow him at all. Behind him, the recruits remained exactly where they were, the circle they had formed now broken without anyone realizing when it had happened. Logan Pierce stood still, his arms no longer crossed, his posture no longer sharp, his eyes fixed on the space the old man had just occupied, replaying every word, every laugh, every careless assumption with a clarity that felt heavier by the second. Because now there was context, now there was understanding, and it did not sit lightly. It settled into him like something permanent, something that would not fade with time. Brooks exhaled slowly at the edge of the yard, the tension in his chest finally easing, not because the situation had resolved, but because it had revealed itself completely. And there was a strange kind of certainty in that, a quiet confirmation that instincts still mattered. That recognition did not always come from rank or training. Sometimes it came from knowing when something did not belong to the present at all. Commander Ethan Cross remained where he was for a moment longer, watching the old man walk away without calling him back, without offering anything further, because nothing more was needed. The respect had been given, the acknowledgement made, and anything beyond that would have reduced it, diluted something that was meant to remain exactly as it was. And after a few seconds, Cross turned, his gaze sweeping once across the recruits, not harsh, not angry, but precise, measured, and they felt it immediately, that silent evaluation, that unspoken understanding that what had happened here would not be corrected with punishment or instruction. It would stay with them in a way no formal lesson ever could. You do not always know who you are standing in front of, Cross said finally, his voice calm, steady, carrying just enough to reach them all without effort. And no one responded, no one moved, because there was nothing to argue, nothing to defend, only the quiet realization that respect was not tied to what could be seen, not to uniform or visible rank, but to something deeper, something earned long before they had ever stepped onto this base. And as Cross walked away in the opposite direction, the compound slowly began to return to motion, voices rising again, footsteps resuming. But the energy had changed, permanently, and Logan remained still for 1 second longer than the others before finally turning, his movements slower now, more deliberate, as if he was carrying something he had not arrived with, something invisible but undeniable, and far across the yard. Arthur Hayes did not look back. Not once. He simply kept walking until the distance absorbed him completely, until he became just another figure against the bright horizon, leaving behind nothing but silence and a lesson no one there would ever forget, because some names are not spoken, some stories are not written, and some respect does not need to be explained, it only needs to be recognized.